Our next presentation, again, just kind of thinking about what Liz said earlier about look at where we are and look at where we started. We are launching our first clinical trial. This just for me personally just seemed like these magic words that were out there that we could never really quite attain, but very excited to hear these next group of individuals talk about the Radiprodil Clinical Trial. So from GRIN Therapeutics, please welcome Doctors Bruce, if I mispronounce, I apologize, Doctors Bruce Leuchter, Dr. Tamara Agajanov, Dr. Hilary Savoie, and Vijay Rai from GRIN Therapeutics.
Good morning, everyone. I think we'll wait for the presentation to get spooled up. But while we're doing that, a heartfelt thank you to all of you for having us here and spending time with you this morning. It's a major event for us and something we've been working toward for a long time. And you'll hear more about the work we've done to prepare for the clinical trial and a lot of explanation around why we're doing what we're doing, why we believe in what we're doing, and how critical it is for us to collaborate with you all in order to achieve success. So we'll spend some time talking about all of that. I guess while the AV work is being sorted through, I'll start with a personal introduction so I can get that out of the way. I'm Bruce Leuchter. I'm the CEO of Nervati Neurosciences. That's the company that manages GRIN Therapeutics. It's a neuroscience-focused biotech company. All we do is neuroscience drug development, and we do it across all sorts of neuroscience diseases. GRIN Therapeutics is our first company that's working on a molecule for development in a rare pediatric indication, GRIN-related disorders, and we bring a lot to bear on the work that we do. So it's really exciting to be here. My background is as a neurologist and a psychiatrist, so I trained in both. I practiced neuropsychopharmacology for about 10 years, led the division of neuropsychiatry at Cornell, New York Presbyterian Hospital. And I give you that background because it was me in the trenches figuring out how to solve problems that exist at the interface of neurology and psychiatry. And there's clearly a lot of that in GRIN-related disorders. So I bring kind of a clinical perspective and a lot of passion to the project. Oh, good, we've got that sorted through. So I'll quickly round out my background. I have classic identity diffusion. So while I spent a lot of time in academic medicine, I also spent a lot of time in figuring out how to get companies funded and figuring out how to replenish resources and pipelines at bigger pharmaceutical companies that hadn't spent enough time in neuroscience. So there's a combination of clinical and academic orientation that I have alongside the actual blocking and tackling of what's required to get programs funded and to get molecules developed. And for the last year or so, I've been in this role at Nervati Neurosciences, championing the cause for GRIN Therapeutics. And we're going to tell you a little bit about that as we progress through the slides. But we can't overstate, so the first slide here, we can't overstate how important it is to work together. And that's true in almost every clinical trial that anyone runs in any disease, but particularly in this disorder, it's critical because we are, out of the gates, the first group together, both patients, families, and us as drug developers who are pursuing a treatment for GRIN-related disorders. And that requires a lot of collaboration, a lot of coordination, and a lot of sacrifice on all sides, particularly the patients and families. So we take the work really seriously. We are committed to doing right by this disorder and the parents and children who suffer from the condition. So we can advance to the next slide unless I'm the one who's supposed to do that. Should I? Got it. Thank you. Down arrow. Let me try the up arrow just in case that, nope, that's not working either. I guess I'll make a comment while we're sorting through this. You'll see it at the tagline here, which talks about gain of function patients, gain of function patients with GRIN-related disorders, or GRIN2B in this particular case. And that is a good segue to this slide. So we, unlike many of the therapeutics that have been developed for patients who suffer from a form of epilepsy of any kind, where you're primarily treating the epilepsy itself and not the broader disorder, we are the opposite of that. So our goal is to be able to treat the whole disorder for patients who have gain of function variants. And that is exciting for us because it represents a precision approach to treating a rare pediatric disorder. And as I said, while there are technologies out there in the gene therapy space and other sophisticated biotech technologies, this is not a gene therapy or what we call an oligonucleotide therapy. This is a small molecule therapy. Small molecule means a pill or a capsule or a solution that you take by mouth. And yet we're still able to go after the disorder with what we call a rifle shot. And the rifle shot is going specifically at the receptor that is hyperexpressed or hypersensitive in patients who have gain of function variants. And that's unique. It has a lot of advantages associated with it, and we hope to explain how we're going to leverage those advantages in the context of the study we're running. But we believe we have an opportunity to treat more than just the seizure. And part of our goal is to help regulators, to help collaborators understand that while people tend to think about seizures and seizures only in many cases of pediatric disorders such as these, we believe because of the mechanism of action of the molecule, the drug candidate that we're developing, that we've actually got a chance to treat behavioral symptomatology in addition to what we characterize as epileptic events. And that's also quite unique. So we can go to the next slide. This is the team of people who are championing the cause at GRIN. And I won't go through everyone's bio, but it's important to note that there's a lot of commitment of both intellectual capability from various people on the page and financial resources. And why that's so important is because when drugs are developed, oftentimes you're at the mercy of what we call the capital community, people who fund these studies. And you find that you get through one phase of the development, but then you're stuck needing to go find more in the way of financing so that you can develop the drugs further. We don't have that problem. We are fully we have full commitment from Blackstone Life Sciences. That's our one and only investor, who has committed capital to fund this all the way through approval. So the risks that drug developers typically encounter where you run out of financial resources is not a risk for this program. That should give everyone some comfort, certainly gives us some comfort. The person to the right of me on this page is Pierandrea Muglia. Some of you may have encountered Pierandrea in the past. He's also a neurologist by training who has been in the epilepsy space for 25 years developing drugs and was the champion of Radiprodil and developing it in GRIN-related disorders. So a really important person on our team and really committed to what we're doing as well. Hans Christinger is our Chief Operating Officer for GRIN Therapeutics and is the Chief Business Officer of Nervati. You'll hear this interchange of Nervati and GRIN Therapeutics. It's a distinction without a difference as it relates to the development of Radiprodil. Hans is a master operator of biotech companies, has spent a lot of time in companies developing medicines for rare neurological diseases, so brings that muscle memory. Tamara Agajanov, you'll hear from in just a moment, also with a lot of experience in developing drugs, a pediatrician by training, so has that doctor purposefulness in treating patients, and has spent time developing drugs in rare neurological indications as well. And then Hillary, I'll skip over Elliot and Marianne. They're not here today, critical team members, but skipping to Hillary, who's a superstar, and I'm sure those of you who've interacted with her probably feel the same way. It's really important for us that we collaborate with the patient community and the family community in a seamless way. And oftentimes you'll find that some of this work is sort of outsourced to consultants that help other companies out. We have a full-time individual who's an absolute rock star in Hillary, who's working hand in glove with all constituents that are a part of the GRIN-related disorders community. So really important to call her out and thank her for her efforts. And then the bottom of the page is, we won't go into the names, but these are seasoned, accomplished, really smart biotech executives, biotech investors, executives, and drug developers. And this gets to my prior comment on how much commitment we have to bring things all the way through approval, which we hope to do. So we can go to the next page. So the purpose of this presentation is really threefold. One was we wanted to share our excitement. I think we've communicated that, but I'll get into it a little bit more. We want to provide details on what you can expect in progressing through the study. And we wanted to plug the patient portal and gathering of patient information, how we understand your children who have this disorder and how we characterize them effectively so that we understand who we're enrolling into studies. But in terms of our excitement, we, as I mentioned before, rare that you can find a pill or a tablet or a solution that can actually go after the etiology, as we call it, or the cause of the disorder. In this case, we can do that, and we think we can do it in a pretty successful way. So we believe not just for the purpose of treating seizures, but also being able to treat the symptoms, as we've mentioned before. So we're really excited about the work we're doing. And the details, so just to tick through the points here so I can get to all of them specifically. We want to talk about the expected timing of the trial. When do we kick it off? Under what circumstances? How do you get involved, and how do we work together on that? The study criteria, how does one become eligible to enroll in the study, and what is the process by which we determine that? And then how do we enable your participation? So we've got all sorts of programs and assistance from third parties who focus specifically on facilitating patient involvement in clinical trials. So we've got some information we'll provide you on that. And then the third, as I mentioned before, in the absence of information about your children, it's impossible to enroll them in our study. So we need engagement from the community to better understand your children and determine whether or not they're eligible to enroll in our GRIN2B gain of function study. And it is also true that even children who aren't GRIN2B gain of function but have a GRIN-related disorder, because of the genetic mutation that drives a certain kind of clinical phenotype, we have an opportunity to think about enrolling those patients in the future. So we've got, this is not strictly a GRIN2B disorder therapeutic potentially. It could be applied to other GRIN-related disorders. We're working on that in the background, but it's fair to say that GRIN2B is the tip of the spear and what we're focused on at this moment in time primarily. So I'll ask to flip to the next page, which is, I'll step in front and try to follow the guide here. So what is Radiprodil? So we sort of covered the work we're doing to study the disorder. We covered the collaboration with patients and families, but now let's talk specifically about what Radiprodil is. And as I mentioned, it's a small molecule, so a pill, a tablet, a solution. Think about those sorts of medicines. But it's a medicine that's been studied in hundreds and hundreds of humans, actual patients. Not patients with GRIN2B or GRIN-related disorders, but patients who have other kinds of neurological issues. And that's greater than 450 patients worth of safety data. So as we think about whether or not this is a safe drug, we're pretty convinced that it is, because the 450 patients who've been exposed to it have actually tolerated it very well. So that's unusual. Typically with medicines that are being developed for new indications, they're new medicines. They haven't had a track record in humans. You do all the possible work you can to determine whether they will be safe, but rarely do you have 400 patients worth of data to reference, and in this case we do. But it's not just the 450 patients who've been studied in other neurological indications. There are also 3 patients worth of data in a rare disorder called infantile spasm, which some of you may be familiar with. And infantile spasm, there was an infantile spasm study which used Radiprodil to treat 3 patients, and the results that we saw in those 3 patients were pretty remarkable. They showed an improvement in symptoms, including, and of course, specifically seizures, but the medicine was well tolerated, patients responded well to it, and so if you couple the 450 patients worth of safety data, which again is a large volume of data, plus the 3 patients, babies that had infantile spasms, and think about the totality of that data set, it gives us a lot of confidence that we're dealing with a safe therapeutic that can be successful in the treatment of GRIN-related disorders, specifically GRIN2B. The mechanism of action, we won't get into too much detail here. We geek out on the science part of things, but it's fair to, probably easiest to represent that it is an NMDA receptor blocker. And in patients with GRIN2B disorder, as you all know, you've got an increased representation of a certain subtype of the NMDA receptor in the brains of children who suffer from this condition. And our goal is to block that. So if you've got a whole lot of receptors that are acting up and causing problems, you try to block those receptors. And that's effectively what we're doing here. We're doing it with an NR2B negative allosteric modulator. Don't worry about that fancy talk, but the bottom line is that it blocks the subtype of the NMDA receptor called the NR2B receptor. And again, that's the subtype of the receptor that is aberrant, that is abnormal, that is causing problems. And what do you do when something's causing problems? You block it. And that's precisely what we're doing here. And we believe there's sound biological rationale that supports that thesis. And we're hopeful and confident that it will have major impact on the underlying condition. But you can't just decide that you're going to take a drug that has 450 patients worth of safety data and sound biological rationale and start a clinical trial. So you have to go through a whole lot of dialogue, interactions, filing of documents with regulators whose job it is to determine whether or not the way we think about treating patients is accurate, is safe, is appropriate. And we've done that in this case. We've had an enormous amount of back and forth with both European regulators and US regulators on how to think about Radiprodil in the context of treating GRIN2B disorder. And the feedback from the regulators has been really encouraging. They've seen the safety data that we've been able to post in humans. They understand the unmet medical need. They encouraged us to not waste any time, to get right to it and deliver efficacy data that can help support approval of the therapeutic. So we've had a lot of encouraging feedback from regulators to proceed, which is comforting and should be comforting to you, given how much we're all focused on safety. And then finally, the interactions we've had with the scientific community, the clinical community, and of course the patient and family community. And as I led with, that's the most critical part of what we do. We rely heavily on basic science researchers to understand the NMDA receptor, understand the NR2B subtype of that receptor, understand your children specifically, so getting back to the portal and the information that you deliver to the portal. There are ways for us to understand your child's genetics and how that relates to Radiprodil, to being treated with this drug. So it's a collaborative effort. It takes a village, and that's what we're banking on here, that the village will all come together and collaborate. So that's all for me. I'm going to advance the next slide and hand it off to Tamara, who will talk a bit more specifically about the study itself. And here's Tamara.
Thank you so much. Awesome. Thanks, Bruce. Thank you, everyone. I don't mean to interrupt the flow of the presentation, but I want to briefly introduce myself and tell you what attending this type of meeting means to me personally. Tamara Agajanov, I'm an SVP of the clinical operations. I've been with GRIN for 3 months now, and I'm humbled and happy to be here. My background is pharma. I spent many, many years in oncology, working at Merck and Novartis. Eventually, I went to work for GRIN Therapeutics 5 years ago in 2017, and I attended my first conference in Angelman syndrome here in Chicago, December 2017. It completely changed my life. The importance of these meetings, you feed the science, having this interaction. These diseases are not a hypothetical disease for us. Seeing you here and giving us feedback on how you live and what's important to you totally drives science. So I can't tell you how happy and humbled I am to be here as part of the GRIN team and just getting to know you and understanding what matters to you. So with this introduction, I'm going to carry on with the study. As Bruce pointed out, we're getting ready to start this phase 1B study. And the population that we're looking to enroll is GRIN2B, gain of function. Age is going to be 6 to 12. It is super important that all the patients that are getting enrolled in the study are actually gain of function. And Bruce explained the importance why the gain of function is important to us. The mechanism, how the drug works, basically drives the patient selection. And in this study, particularly in the 1B study, we're going to select the patient that have a gain of function. Hillary is going to talk later how, if you're not sure about the variant, how to get this information and how to get this registration and access the website. So I'm going to let Hillary explain what the gain of function, how you can get this information in the future. Clinical profile of the patients. We're going to have 12 patients enrolled in the study, up to 12 patients. If we see that the data collection is going in a way that we sort of hypothetically predicted, we may interrupt the study and go into the next clinical phase, which I will explain in my next slide. But we're looking for the two groups of patients. One is seizure, and one group of patients was behavior. Dr. Herdog, your presentation was super, super helpful in understanding the biomarkers for the study. I wish we had a biomarker like oncology imaging or like in hepatitis you have a viral load that we can just measure and say that we have an efficacy. We know that the drug is working. But in this case, we rely a lot on the scales. And again, we're going to talk about the scales that we've selected for the study. But capturing the seizure, understanding this delta between the baseline that we collect, how many seizures we collect at the baseline and end of the study will really determine the success of the style. We have here NMDA receptor with its subunits, it's glutamate, it's glycine, and I think Bruce explained very, very eloquently why we need to go into the gain of function first and why is 2B for now. Eventually, when we get to the bigger study, we're going to expand into other GRIN-related indications, and we're going to have a larger study. We can go to the next slide, please. So about the study, the primary objective of this study, it's a phase 1 study, and it's very, very default that in the phase 1 studies, your primary objective is to determine that your drug is safe and you have a first signs of efficacy and your drug is well tolerated. As Bruce alluded previously, the adult studies have been done in Europe and US. Now we need to make sure that we're getting into the pediatrics and we're very, very safe how we introduce the drug and we know the right dose. So if I have to summarize what the purpose of the study is to find a dose that will help us measure the efficacy of the drug. And this takes me to my secondary objective, which is measure efficacy of the Radiprodil by measuring the seizure burden. And what it means is the participants who will decide to enroll in the study will have to capture seizures on a daily basis. So we know if we have a reduction in seizures. We're also going to measure behavioral symptoms, sleep and motor function, and we're also going to ask you about the quality of your life. If you think in this period of time the quality of your life bettered, either it's sleep, improved sleep, behavioral symptoms that got better during the course of the study. So these are the scales that we're going to be using to measure the efficacy of the drug. We are also capturing EEG, hoping that EEG will display some patterns, if you will, that are specific to the GRIN2B. Eventually, we hope that EEG at some point will become the biomarker, but I think we have a long way to go to get to that point. So this is our timeline. As any clinical trial, the design of this clinical trial is very, very, very classic. If you choose to participate and you are within certain age and you have a gain of function, we're going to send you to the site that participates in a study, the clinical site that participates in a study. Hillary is going to talk about sites that we've selected in US and outside US. And once you sign the informed consent, which basically states the physician is going to explain to you what are the risks and benefits of the drug, what we're hoping to gain from the study, what are some safety measures precautions that you have to take, who is eligible for the study, you will sign the informed consent. Then once you sign the informed consent, that basically tells us that now we can collect the data for the X period of time and basically monitor the kids. And this period is 4 weeks for us, 4 or 5 weeks. We're going to continue to capture the medical history. We're going to continue to monitor your blood tests. We're going to continue to capture seizures, if you have seizures or your behavioral symptoms. 4 or 5 weeks later, we're going to ask you to come back to the same site and the physician is going to reevaluate if you're still eligible for the study based on the information that you have given the physician. And then you're going to be entering what's called the baseline phase of the study, and it's a titration phase. We are doing the drug introduction happens in a very structured, in a very, very controlled way. We're going to give you the smallest dose, and then we're going to slowly titrate to the dose that is considered MTB, which is the maximum therapeutic dose. And this is the dose that's going to be, we're going to ask you to maintain during the 8-week maintenance period. So I mentioned 4 visits during the titration phase, 3 visits during the maintenance phase, and we understand that travel is really difficult. So we're going to accommodate as much as we can with the virtual visits. We're going to have mobile nurses come to your homes if you so choose to collect blood, so we can continue to monitor safety and also continue to monitor the efficacy. Once you complete the study, then you will have a choice to continue into the open label extension, which is another study, which will allow your kids to stay on drug, should you choose to, or PI recommends, the physician recommends that you stay on drug. Or you may decide to discontinue the study and not go into the open label extension. It's going to be completely your and physician's decision. And that sort of long phase we'll call the open label extension study, and it will carry on for years until we get to the submission or some new data will emerge which will tell us that we should change the course of the study. So this is what our current study looks like. Hillary is going to cover on all the services that we're going to be providing when it comes to travel, when it comes to mobile nurses. We're incredibly appreciative of your participation in the study, and we want to encourage everyone to go to the GRIN portal and start capturing your variants if you haven't done so. I think it's going to help not only the study aside, I think it's going to help us understand the prevalence of the disease, epidemiology, and also what treatment options we should be targeting. We can go to the next slide. This is another presentation of our 1B study. Basically, the 1B study is what I just described. Once the study is completed, we did receive, last year, we did receive the FDA feedback that basically told us because the disease is so rare, we encouraged a seamless transition into what's called a pivotal study. Pivotal study is the study that is usually blinded. It's very classic design here. You have a placebo group and you have a study, the drug group that, and it's usually 80 to 100 patients because the pivotal studies need to be powered. They need to have a statistical significance. We hope that by the time we get to the pivotal study, we're expanding into the other GRIN-related disorders. It's not only 2B, but we're also going to be enrolling kids, 2A kids, and as well as the 1 and hopefully 2Ds as well, however many we can identify at this point. Dr. Kodak talked about the heterogeneity of this population. Some have seizures, some have behavioral problems, some have sleep issues, some have mobility issues. So our endpoints, we need to find this common denominator, how we're going to be able to assess the efficacy of the disease. And designing this pivotal study is going to be super important for us. We're going to work closely not only with FDA, but also with other authorities in Europe. And we're planning to engage 5 or 6 European countries. Eventually, we plan to go to Australia and other countries, which at this point we have not identified, but we sort of have a plan. So our pivotal study, this is the design. Unfortunately, nobody likes placebo, but this is sort of what the FDA mandates. You need to have a control group in order to compare your drug group, and that's a classic design. We may introduce other sort of parameters or different designs into this. I think it's to be determined how quickly we're going to get into the pivotal study and what our design is going to look like, but this is sort of the classic design that FDA mandates that we conduct the studies. And again, everybody who completes the phase 1B study or phase 2 study will have an opportunity to get into the open label extension until we get to the submission state that hopefully FDA will give us approval, or however long the study will continue, you'll have an opportunity to stay on study and stay on medication. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. I'm going to invite Hillary to talk about different scales that we're using, but this is basically when I talked about the endpoints, we're measuring seizures, and these are different sort of endpoints that we're going to be, how we're going to measure our endpoints, different scales. And with that, I'm going to introduce Hillary.
Thanks, Tamara. Hi, everyone. So again, not to interrupt the flow, but I'm Hillary. I think it's really important that before I start talking that I say the first hat I always wear whenever I'm talking to any of you is that I'm a mom. So I'm a mom of an ultra-rare child myself. So I live this every day. And I am lucky enough to be in this role to work with all of you and my colleagues here in making sure that as we talk about this trial, that we're putting faces and realities of daily life at the forefront. And so I think this, this graph here is so important because we, as Bruce said, we're not just thinking about seizures here. And I think we all know as parents, whether we have kids with seizures or not, some things like sleep are absolutely essential to our quality of life and the way that we feel about how our child is doing. So we're making sure that we're going to be looking at sleep, at gross motor function, at quality of life, at what's called caregiver burden, which is a term I don't like, but really it just talks about how much work is going into your daily lives to take care of your children. And also as a parent, I'm always thinking about trying to make this real for what this looks like for all of you. So if you're in this trial, you'll have a dedicated mobile device that you'll be entering some of this information on. And when you go to interact with study staff, they also will be running some of these scales for you. Next slide. Okay, so other important thing, where are we conducting this study? In the US, our first site, we expect to be up and running in Maryland, and we will follow on with sites in New York, Pennsylvania, and Colorado. And in Europe, we are really pleased to say that we have just submitted to move forward with the trial in the Netherlands and Spain, and we will follow on later with Germany and Italy. Next slide. Yeah. Okay, so I have the best job in the world. And Natalie's getting a lot of play here today. Part of what I get to do is do things like dry runs of the logistics that we're putting in place for our families. We know that the idea of signing up for a trial is kind of, it's a bit scary, right? Like what does that even mean? How do I get there? What do I have to worry about? So we've been working really closely with the amazing advocates in the GRIN community to be sure that we understand what you all need, what you're worried about, what's important to you. And we have hired a white glove third party to help us with all of the transportation, the accommodations, the welcome logistics. But that wasn't good enough for us. We wanted to dry run it with Natalie's help and make sure that it all works exactly the way it should for all of you. So we are working daily, and we really welcome, I'm here for the next 2 days, come and talk to me about what you're thinking about, regardless of whether you consider yourselves candidates for the trial. We still want to hear from you, and we want to understand what you might need. So next slide. Okay, so this is one of the big things here. And again, please come and talk to us, ask us questions about this. We know that in this community, understanding the difference between loss of function and gain of function is a little bit confusing. And we are working super closely with researchers in the field to be continuing to elucidate variants that haven't yet been understood as to whether they're gain of function or loss of function. So of all of you here, how many of you have been to the portal and put your variant in to see? Okay, all right. And how long ago? 2 weeks ago? Okay, so I'm gonna step through all of these steps with everyone. Please know that in the next 2 to 3 weeks, there are going to be more variants that are uploaded to the portal. So if your variant 6 months ago didn't have a result, you may want to check again, okay? So if you go to the GRIN portal, there is this handy dandy variant analysis button to click. And it's a little confusing. You have to input your gene here. So you select between GRIN1, GRIN2B, GRIN2A, et cetera. So make sure you do that first. And then you can put in your gene and variant details, either the C dot number, which some of you might see on your genetic report, or the P dot number. And you put those in, and you press search, and it pops up with a report for you. And so it will tell you if it's likely pathogenic, right? So some of you, that may still be a little bit of a question as a mom who has a kid with variants that are of uncertain significance. That can be a little tricky, but hopefully you see likely pathogenic. And then if you pop to the next slide, you can see if you click on Generate Report, you'll get something that looks like this. So again, you'll see your number, and then you'll see whether it's pathogenic. And then this is the part that's really important for the sake of this study. You'll see likely gain of function, likely loss of function, possible gain of function, possible loss of function, or uncertain. And I'm going to guess that a lot of you have know people who see uncertain. And again, in the next 2 to 3 weeks, there should be an influx of more variant information. And as I said, we're working really closely with the researchers who are pushing that information out into the public realm. But this is what's really important to understand. Why this is important is it's essentially tells you whether you could be a candidate for the trial. So if you see likely gain of function and you're interested in the trial, your next step is to contact Liz or contact me, and we can start having further discussions. If you see uncertain, but you're still interested, same steps. Contact Liz, contact me, because we have lists of variants that we're pushing through to be analyzed, and we're trying to improve the knowledge around these variants. So next slide. Okay. Again, visit the GRIN portal. And as Liz said, all registries, everywhere you can put your information, the more information out there, the better. And stay connected with your advocacy groups. Contact me. I like getting emails. And then I think before we click to the next slide, I just want to say, we're here because we want to learn from you, right? We're here because we are interested in having conversations with you and understanding your kids. And we had this amazing chance to interview a couple of families, and we've made a video that we're going to share today, and we have some more opportunities, if you see Nick over there, to sign up to do interviews with us in the next 2 days. We want to hear from absolutely all of you about your experiences. So please sign up with Nick for video interviews. And with that, if you could, there's sound, so yeah. Uh-oh. It's a world premiere, so hold your breath. Oh, okay. So this video is something that I've had the chance to interview 2 families that I've gotten to know pretty well, and it's been a real joy that I work with a team of people who want to hear these stories and learn more about our families. And the end of this video, there's no spoilers, but it is my single favorite patient-family interaction that I have ever seen. So again, Natalie is going to get a lot of play, just FYI. Everyone should ask for her autograph, I think. She's quite the star. No worries. I don't have any good jokes. I know we're in Chicago and improv is is key, but is not a skill set that I have.
So this is almost downloaded, but just as we wait, we're going to take a break after this video concludes and we're done. During the break, feel free to obviously talk to one another. There is no dinner plan tonight, so you might want to be thinking ahead about what your plans might want to be for that. We'll be working to get the live stream kind of hopefully dialed in a little better for everybody that's watching that's not here, and then we're going to get set for our first panel discussion as well. So, yep.
All right, just one quick thing. Also on the break, if you want to head over to the childcare room, which is like the first hallway that way, you kind of curve around, go past the stairs. We have a woman outside the room. Her name is Kathy Smart. She's from our local children's hospital, Advocate Lutheran General, and she has information about sibling support. And she has lots of fun giveaways for your kids. So go say hi to Kathy. She'll be here through the afternoon break, so till about 2:50.
Hi everyone, my name is Kasha. I'm from Itasca, Illinois, and I'm a mom of Bianca. She's 4.5 and she has a GRIN2B diagnosis.
Can you tell us who you are? Natalie. And? Mommy. And?
Mikey.
Who's this? Daddy. And? Mikey.
I love explaining about GRIN2B and I love talking about it. And I like when people ask me what Bianca can do, not the question that what she won't be able to do in the future. Because a lot of the times people won't ask, is she walking? They would ask me a question, will she ever walk? Like, who cares what will she do? Like, she's here. She's doing this right now. This is important.
When you're trying to keep her safe, in big crowds, like being able to navigate through and I guess that's the independent learning, but the safety aspect of it is a big part because everyone's a friend to Natalie, which is like I said, is great as long as one of us are there. But the fear for me is if I'm not there and not everyone is genuine and good as she is.
So if there will be one medication that could help Bianca, would be definitely a pill for the behavioral side effects. And I think that's what's really important, to bring more awareness so we don't change our kids, we change the world with the power, the wellness of our children.
All of this is something that can give the community hope, something to look toward in the future, that we're going to find ways to make the lives of our kids easier. We're going to find ways to keep them happy. We're going to find ways to keep them healthy. And we can do it by working together. And we're just going to do the best that we can for all of our kids.
Amen.
Amen. Natalie said.